My father did not do this. Give me 60 seconds, and I can prove it. A boy stood up in the third row of the gallery, 11 years old. A church blazer 3 sizes too big for him. The room went quiet. Then the room began to smile. His name was Elijah Carter. Neat braids, a clip-on tie, both hands flat on the bench in front of him. In his lap sat a backpack, zipped, heavy at one corner. Nobody in that courtroom knew what was inside it. Nobody thought to ask a child. At the defense table there was no defense lawyer. There was only Marcus Carter, the boy's father, in a county jail shirt gone soft and gray from washing. Oil never fully leaves a mechanic's hands. He was staring at his son. He was shaking his head. No. Sit down, son. The bailiff took one step. Marcus's chair scraped the floor. Elijah, sit down. But the boy did not sit. He looked at the bench, at the judge, at the one person in the room who could send his father away for years. Please, he said. 60 seconds. Prosecutor Andrew Pike almost laughed into his own sleeve. Navy suit, red case folder, a watch worth more than the man on trial earned in a season. He leaned toward his co-counsel and said it loud enough to travel. Is the county being lawyered by a 6th grader now? The gallery gave him his laugh. A soft, ugly ripple of it. A woman covered her mouth. 2 men in the back grinned down at their phones. Not one person stood up for the boy. Not one. I counted the room that afternoon, and the room counted for nothing. I have spent a long time in rooms like this one. Back benches, service halls, the seats nobody photographs. Call me the quiet witness. I have watched a great many grown people decide a child has nothing to say. I have rarely watched one of them turn out to be right. Ours Andrew Pike had won a great deal in this building. 91 convictions, a wall of framed certificates, a corner office he had not earned so much as inherited, the same desk his father worked behind for 30 years. His name was stenciled on a hallway. He did not lose to people who could not afford a lawyer. Judge Renata Hale watched all of it from the bench. Silver glasses, gray at the temples, both hands folded on the wood. She had heard 10,000 people ask her for more time. She had learned to tell the ones who wanted a delay from the ones who wanted the truth. She looked at the boy a long moment. Young man, she said, this is a court of law. It is not a school play. The gallery chuckled again, on her side now. But the gavel stayed under her hand, and the bailiff kept his place. She kept looking at the boy who had not once looked away from her. He's my dad, Elijah said. Just that. He can't afford a lawyer, so I read the law for him. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to look at one date. That's all. One date, and 60 seconds. Pike stood and buttoned his jacket. Your Honor, this is theater. The people have a signed report, a sworn officer, and a date. We are ready to proceed. The defendant's child is not evidence. He is a delay. He smiled at the boy. Go on and sit down, son. A delay, Judge Hale repeated. She turned the word over. In 30 years on that bench, she had signed a great many things that later kept her awake. Fast dockets, tired afternoons, papers she trusted because a man in a good suit told her they were clean. She looked at the clock on the back wall. 60 seconds, Mr. Carter. She said it to the boy, not the father. You will not approach a witness. You will not touch the evidence table without my leave. You will speak to me, and to no one else. When the second hand reaches the top, you begin. When it comes back around, you are finished. Do you understand me? I understand, Elijah said. Pike sat down slowly, the way a man sits when he has decided a thing is beneath him. He opened his red folder. He did not even lift a pen. Why would he? He had a date on a police report, signed and sworn. He had every adult in the room. The boy had a backpack. Elijah unzipped the backpack and reached past where a phone or a tablet or a lawyer's slim briefcase might have been. His hand came out holding a book, thick, old, the spine bound with a strip of yellowed tape. The cover read "Evidence" in worn gold letters. Pencil tabs stuck out of the pages like feathers, a dozen of them, spaced by a child's uneven hand. I watched the prosecutor look at that book and file it away as nothing in half a second. An old law book, a prop, a kid playing dress-up in his father's trouble. I have watched 100 powerful people make exactly that face at exactly the wrong object. It is the last easy breath they get to take. Marcus Carter had gone very still at the defense table. He knew that book. He had bought it used for $2, years before Elijah was born, and had barely opened it in his life. His son had read every page. The father's eyes were wet now. He did not yet know whether he was allowed to hope. "Before I start that clock," Judge Hale said, "I want to understand one thing. You are 11 years old. You have no lawyer. And you are telling me you found something 4 grown attorneys on this case did not." Elijah nodded once. "Yes, ma'am. Because I read the whole file. They only read the front of it. They only read the front of it." She let the sentence sit in the room. Pike's jaw tightened at his table. Somewhere in the gallery, a phone that had been filming a joke went quiet and, for the first time, began to listen. The judge folded her hands. "All right. Tell me how a boy comes to read a book like that. Then you will get your minute." Elijah closed the book on one finger, holding his page. So the boy told the court how it started. And I will tell it the way I watched it happen. 3 weeks earlier, Marcus Carter had not come home. Elijah waited at the window until the streetlight buzzed on. Then a neighbor drove him down to the county building to find out why. Marcus was behind glass, in a county shirt, looking smaller than his son had ever seen him. "It's a mistake, baby," he said through the phone. "An old ticket. $40 I forgot about. They'll sort it out." He pressed his palm flat to the glass. "Don't you worry about me. Do your homework. I'll be home before you know it." But they did not sort it out. A day in the holding cell became a week, and somewhere inside that same week, a parts warehouse across town was broken into at night. The county needed a name to write on it. A former employee with a grudge already in the file was the easy name. The easy name was Marcus Carter. Elijah did not cry at the glass. His father had a rule about that. "Crying is for after," Marcus always said. "First you find out what is true. Then you can feel whatever you want." So the boy went looking for what was true. He started with the one thing his father owned that might help. The book. It had sat on a shelf in their apartment for 11 years, a $2 law book a mechanic bought on a hopeful day, and never once opened. Elijah opened it. He did not understand the first page. He read it again. He read it a 4th time. Then he took a pencil and marked every word he would have to go look up. That is where the county law library comes in, and where a woman named Nora Bell first saw him. A court clerk, gray cardigan, a stamp pad always within reach. She found a boy at a corner table, an old book open, a dictionary open beside it, sounding out a word under his breath. Probable. Cause. She did not shoo him out. "You looking for something specific, baby?" Nora asked. Elijah did not look up. "My dad's report," he said. "I want to read the whole thing, not just the front." Nora went still at the counter. In 20 years, she had watched 100 lawyers read only the front. She pulled the file for him herself and set it down gently. Over 3 weeks, the boy came every afternoon after school. Nora showed him the shelves, the one on records, the one on custody logs, the one his tabs would end up marking. She did not do his reading for him. She only made sure a small person could reach the high books. That was all he ever asked her for. What Marcus knew, behind the glass, was only that his boy visited and did his homework. He did not know Elijah had memorized the shelf numbers. He did not know his son fell asleep over the evidence book with the lamp still on. A father in a cell believes he is shielding his child from the weight of it. Sometimes the child is already carrying it, and slowly, page by page, the word stopped being a wall. Elijah learned one plain, hard rule, and he underlined it twice. A charge has to stand on a date the records can hold. If the papers disagree with each other about when a thing happened, then nobody has proven it happened at all. No clean date, no probable cause. There was one more line the boy tabbed, and it mattered most of all. A county's own custody record, who it locks up and when, is a record the county has to stand behind. It is not a witness telling a story. It is the building's own memory, stamped and logged. You cannot argue with the day a jail says it held a man. He also learned a quieter thing, and it was worse. Nobody had checked. The report carried a date. The county carried its own records with their own dates. And no lawyer, no officer, not the man with the corner office, had ever laid the two side by side. They had all read the front. The boy had read the back. The afternoon he found it, Elijah was not even looking for it. He was copying dates into his notebook, the way his father taught him, and he set the report page beside the booking sheet to save room on the small library table. And there the two dates sat, next to each other, refusing to match. He went very still. He read them again. He did not run to tell anyone. His father's rule held him in the chair. Find out what is true first. So he pulled the count sheets, the ones with the deputy's initials, and he checked the 14th twice. Morning, night. His father's name in a cell on the night the report placed him across town. Only then did the boy let his own hands shake. Back at the bench, Judge Hale listened to the short version of all this. Elijah did not tell it to move her. He told it flat, the way a witness tells a thing. When he finished, she was quiet a moment. Then she said, "You keep saying a date. Whose date? Which one?" And Elijah answered, "The one on their report, and the one in your own building nobody opened." Andrew Pike did not like the direction of the room, so he stood to take it back. "Your Honor, since we are entertaining this, let the record be simple." He lifted the red folder above the table. "The people's case is 1 page long, and it is enough. A sworn officer, a warehouse, a date." He read from the report the way a man reads a receipt. On the night of Friday the 14th, at approximately 11:40 in the evening, the defendant unlawfully entered the Halstead Parts warehouse on Cutter Road. He laid the page flat. Signed, sworn, dated. The defense, such as it is an 11-year-old with a library book. "That is your whole case," Judge Hale said. "One report." Pike spread his hands. "It is a clean report." Officer Dwyer responded to the alarm. He knows that block. He knew the defendant's history at that warehouse, a man let go for cause. He put a date to it, and he swore to it. We do not need a symphony to prove a burglary. That history was this. Marcus Carter had worked at the Halstead warehouse 2 years until an inventory came up short, and a manager needed a name that was not his own. Marcus was let go for a cause he never got to answer. It made him bitter, the file said. It also made him the easiest name in the county to write on a nighttime burglary. Officer Dwyer was not in the room. He had signed the report and moved on to the next one. That is how it works. One tired officer writes a date at the end of a long shift, swears to it a week later from memory, and files it. From that moment, the date stops being a guess. It becomes a fact, because it is typed, because a badge is under it. Watch what the prosecutor did there, because it is the whole trick of these rooms. He said the date like it was the ground under your feet, solid, given, a thing you stand on and never test. 91 times that had worked for him. A confident man reads you a date, and you forget to ask him whether it is true. "And the defendant's account?" the judge asked. Pike waved a hand. "The defendant kept saying he was already locked up, Your Honor. They all say a version of that. He never produced a date. He never produced a paper. A grown man could not do it in 3 weeks. He glanced at the boy. I doubt a child does better in 60 seconds. And there it was. The whole case, and the whole trap, folded into one sentence. Marcus Carter had been telling them the truth the entire time. I was already locked up. He said it in the cell. He said it at arraignment. He said it to a public defender with 400 other files, and no 10 minutes to pull one date. So the truth just sat there, unstamped, sounding like every excuse the room had ever heard. The public defender assigned to Marcus had meant well and had no time. 400 files. He met Marcus for 9 minutes, wrote alibi, unclear on a legal pad, and moved to the next cell. Nobody in the system did a single cruel thing. That is the quiet horror of these cases. A man can be buried under nothing but tired people being busy. At the defense table, Marcus had lowered his head. For 3 weeks he had listened to clever people in good suits decide he was lying about the simplest fact of a man's life. Where he had been. Now his son was on his feet, in a blazer bought for a funeral, saying the thing Marcus could not make one adult hear. The father's hands were shaking on the wood. "Your Honor," Pike said, closing his folder, "I have been generous with the court's afternoon. The people rest on the report. If the boy has a paper, let him produce it. If he cannot, I ask that we stop spending a courtroom on a child's love for his father, however touching that love may be." Judge Hale turned to Elijah. "You heard him. He says the date on his report is solid, and your father never gave one back. Do you have a date? A real one? On paper?" Elijah opened the evidence book to his tab. Tucked between the pages was a single folded photocopy he had made at the library for 10 cents. "I have 2 dates, ma'am," he said. "That is the problem. That is the whole problem. Nobody in this building has ever set them next to each other. If you let me set them next to each other, it takes about 40 seconds. You gave me 60. I only need the county's own records here on the table." Pike's polish showed a hairline then. "Your Honor, we cannot have a minor rummaging through evidence." But the judge raised one finger. "He is not touching your evidence, Counselor. He is asking for mine. For the courts. Custody logs are the county's own records, and this is the county's own courtroom." She looked toward the clerk's desk. Ms. Bell. Nora Bell stood at her desk. 20 years a court clerk, and she had never once been called into the middle of a hearing like this. "Your Honor," Hale said, "Mr. Carter has referred to a custody record in this county's system. Pull it, the original, and bring the intake calendar for that month while you are up." Nora's hands knew the drawer before her mind caught up. She had pulled this very file for a boy at a corner table 3 weeks running. She crossed to the cabinet, and I watched a woman who had spent her life stamping other people's papers realize that this time the stamp might mean everything. She set 2 documents on the clerk's rail, the booking log, the month's calendar. Pike leaned to his co-counsel and murmured something. The younger lawyer did not murmur back. He was staring at the booking log on the table, and he had gone a shade paler than the paper. He had helped prepare this case. He had read the front of it. He was doing the arithmetic now, and it was arriving early for him. "Bring them and set them on the table," the judge told her. "Counsel may observe. No one touches them but me and the boy only with my leave." Pike came half out of his chair. "Your Honor." "Sit, Mr. Pike. You rested. Now we look." He sat. The room had forgotten to breathe. 2 county papers lay on the table beside one red folder. "Your Honor." Pike tried once more. Quieter. "Even if there is a log, a photocopy proves nothing. Records have to be authenticated." Hale did not look up. "Then it is fortunate the originals are in my clerk's hands, and my clerk is an officer of this court. We will reach authentication, Counselor. Right now the boy has a minute. Let him spend it." Elijah opened the evidence book flat and turned it so the bench could see the tab. His father's underline doubled in soft pencil. He set one finger on the line. "This is the rule, ma'am. I did not invent it. A charge stands on a date the records can hold. If the county's own papers fight each other about when, there is no probable cause. May I show you the 2 dates? Marcus lifted his head at the defense table. He met his son's eyes across 10 feet of courtroom and gave the smallest nod. No word of caution in it. No confession of fear. Just the one he gave in the shop when Elijah handed him the right wrench without being asked. The nod that meant go on. I trust your hands. The boy nodded back. The clock is your 60 seconds, Judge Hale said. It starts when you touch the first paper. It stops when you step back. Run past the minute and we are finished, whatever you have shown me. Do you understand? Elijah wiped his palm once on his too big blazer. Yes, ma'am. Then when you are ready, counselor. She had called him counselor. Nobody in that room laughed. The clock on the back wall was the old kind. A black rim, a red second hand that jerked forward once a beat. 200 hearings a year had moved under that clock, and nobody ever watched it. Now the whole room watched it. The red hand stood near the 9, climbing toward the top where a boy's 1 minute would begin. I have watched a great many things go wrong in rooms like this. I do not let myself hope easily, and I do not often let myself be afraid. But I will tell you the plain truth of that afternoon. When the boy reached for the first paper, I was afraid. Afraid his hand would shake. Afraid the minute would swallow him. Afraid the only chance a good man had left in the world was 11 years old. Because that is the cruelty of 60 seconds. It is not enough time to be nervous in. A grown lawyer would have filled it with speeches. Elijah spent his on the calendar. His hand found it first, 1 finger pressed onto a single square. Friday the 14th, the night the report swore his father was climbing through a warehouse window. This is their date, Elijah said. He did not touch the red folder. He pointed, the way the judge had allowed him. Friday the 14th, 11:40 at night. The report says my dad was on Cutter Road, going through a window. His finger traveled from the calendar square to the report's top line. The same date. He had matched them for the room. Everybody agrees on this part. Now here is the county's date. He set his hand flat beside the booking log, not on it, and looked to the bench for the nod. She gave it. He turned the log a quarter turn so the judge could read the top line. This is the sheet from when they took my dad in on the old ticket. It has a time on it. It has a date on it. It has a deputy's badge number on it. They booked my father into county holding on Thursday the 13th, 9:22 at night. He moved his finger down the log, line by line, the way Nora had shown him to read a record. And they never let him back out. He was still inside on the 14th. Look at the counts, ma'am. The counts are the part nobody reads. A county jail counts the people it holds, morning and night. A deputy walks the row and initials every name. Elijah's finger stopped. Here is the morning count on the 14th. My dad's name. Initialed. Here is the night count on the 14th. His name. Initialed. 9:30 at night. The report says the warehouse window was 11:40. Understand what that means, because the county had built its whole night on the opposite. To rob the Halstead warehouse, a man has to be at the Halstead warehouse. Marcus Carter was in a holding cell on the county's own row, 11 miles away, being handed a cold tray, and then a warm one. You cannot climb through a warehouse window from inside a cell. No one can. At the clerk's rail, Nora Bell had one hand pressed flat to her chest. She had stamped 10,000 of these logs. She had believed, the way you believe a thing you never test, that the stamps kept people safe. Now she watched a child use one of those stamps to reach up and pull a man back out of a hole the whole system had dropped him into. The room did the arithmetic a beat behind the boy. At 11:40 on the night of the 14th, the county said Marcus Carter was climbing through a window on Cutter Road. The county also said, in its own hand, initialed by its own deputy, that Marcus Carter was in a holding cell being counted for the night. Both could not be true. One of them was a lie the county had told itself. He couldn't have been at the warehouse, Elijah said, and his voice did not climb. It dropped, the way his father's did when a thing mattered. Not because I say so, because you say so. Your jail, your deputy, your ink. My dad was 3 floors under this room, getting counted for the night, while your report says he was across town with a crowbar. Marcus Carter put one oil-stained hand over his mouth. He did not make a sound. 3 weeks of being called a liar about the one thing he knew for certain, and his boy had just made the whole county say it back to him as the truth. He was not crying yet, but he was doing the harder thing, holding still so his son could finish. Now the witness ladder, the thing the room had earned. First the gallery that had laughed. It went silent, not the polite kind, the other kind, where a room understands it has been standing on the wrong side of something. The 2 men with the phones had stopped grinning. One of them had quietly started to record, for real. The court reporter stopped typing and stared at the log. A deputy by the door, a man who initialed counts exactly like the one on that page, went rigid. He knew that form. He knew what an initial beside a name at 9:30 at night meant, and it did not mean Cutter Road. He looked at Marcus Carter as though seeing him for the first time. Your Honor. Pike was on his feet. The polish was gone. This is, at most, a clerical discrepancy. Dates get transposed. A booking clerk fat fingers a keypad. This does not exonerate a man. It... Counsel. Judge Hale did not raise her voice either. You rested on that date 1 minute ago. You called it signed and sworn. You do not get to call it a typo the moment it clears him. Pike looked to his co-counsel for help, the reflex of a man used to a team. The younger lawyer looked at the table and would not meet his eyes. Even his own side had read the log now. There is a particular loneliness to being the last person in a room who still believes his own case. Andrew Pike had just walked straight into it. And if it is a clerical error, she went on, then your probable cause was built on a clerical error, and a man lost 3 weeks of his life to one. Either the date is right, and he is innocent, or the date is wrong, and you never had a case at all. I am curious which door you would like, Mr. Pike. Pike had no door. He stood in his good suit with no door to walk through. Elijah was almost finished. He laid the report and the log side by side and squared them with 2 fingers so the 2 dates stacked in one column. Their 1140, the county's 930 count. He added no words to it. He had learned from the book that when the papers say the thing themselves, you step out of their way and let them say it. The old evidence book still lay open on the table, its tab standing up, the doubled underline catching the light. $2, 11 years on a shelf, a mechanic's hopeful forgotten purchase, and inside it, a Rule 4 attorneys with law degrees had walked straight past, sitting there under a child's pencil, doing the exact work the person who wrote it long ago meant it to do. That is the 2 dates, ma'am, Elijah said. That is all I had. He stepped back from the table, both hands at his sides, the way you step back from a thing you are not allowed to touch twice. The red second hand was passing the 4. He had begun at the top. 40 seconds. The judge looked at the clock, then at the boy, and what crossed her face was not judicial at all. The title of this story says the judge gave the black boy 60 seconds. That is true. What the title leaves out is that he handed 20 of them back. He proved his father could not have done it, in the county's own ink, in about the time it takes the rest of us to find our keys. Then he stopped, because he was done, and honest people stop when they are done. And then a thing happened that I had waited years to watch in a room like that one. In the 3rd row, an old man who had come for a different case stood up. He said nothing. He just stood, hat in both hands, the way men his age stand when a flag goes past. One person, standing for the boy. In a room where an hour earlier, not one of them had. Then the woman who had covered her mouth to laugh stood too. Then the deputy by the door, which a deputy is not supposed to do. Then a young public defender, in the gallery on another matter entirely, got to her feet with her files still under her arm. It was not the whole room, but it was enough of it. Enough that Andrew Pike could count them. And he did. "Ms. Bell," Judge Hale said, "you heard Mr. Pike ask about authentication. Let us give it to him." Nora stepped forward. "The booking log and the daily count sheets are records of this county, made in the regular course, kept in my custody. I pulled these from the vault myself this month. They are what they say they are." She set her stamp to the corner and pressed. It was the loudest sound in the room. "For the record," the judge said, "the court finds the custody log and the count sheets to be authentic county records." She turned to Pike. "Which means your clerical error theory has a new problem, counselor. If the log is authentic and the report is authentic, then the county has sworn to two facts that cannot share one night, and only one of them locked a man in a cell." Pike tried the last thing men like Pike try. "The count sheets could be mistaken, Your Honor. A deputy miscounts. It happens." Judge Hale nodded slowly. "It does. So let us ask the deputy." She looked to the door, where the still man in uniform had been listening to all of it. "Deputy, those are your initials on the night count for the 14th. Do you stand behind them, or did you count a man who was not there?" Andrew Pike was doing math of his own now, and it was not the county's. He was counting the weeks Marcus Carter had sat in a cell on his signature. He was counting the reporters who would want the number 60, and the number 40, and the age 11. He was counting, for the first time in 91 cases, backward from a mistake he could not unsign. Now the deputy came to the rail. He was gray at the temples and slow on his feet, a man who had walked that row for 18 years. He looked at the sheet, at his own cramped initials, at the date. "I stand behind them, Your Honor," he said quietly. "I do not initial a name I did not see in a cell. I saw Marcus Carter on that row the night of the 14th. I brought him a second tray, because the first one came cold." The room heard the second tray, and something in it gave way. Marcus Carter heard about the tray, and finally looked up at the deputy, this stranger who had carried him a warm dinner on the worst night of his life, and remembered it 3 weeks later. Marcus mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." The deputy gave him one short nod, the nod of one working man to another, and went back to the door to stand very straight. I have watched a lot of testimony. Most of it is careful, lawyered, sanded smooth. Every so often a person says a true thing so plainly that the whole architecture of a case falls in behind it. A cold tray, a second tray, a deputy who remembered a quiet man on his row. That is what a real alibi sounds like. It is not a speech. It is a cold dinner, remembered by the man who carried it. Now the checking that should have happened 3 weeks earlier happened in 10 minutes, in the open, in front of everyone. Nora laid out the intake photograph, time-stamped. The property receipt for Marcus's belt and shoelaces, dated the 13th. The medical intake, the fingerprint card, each stamped with a time that put him inside those walls while a warehouse across town was being emptied. The judge asked Nora to state the span aloud, for the record and for the room. Nora read it plainly. Booked the 13th at 9:22 in the evening. Released the 22nd, 9 days later, into the hands of a public defender who had finally pulled the date. 9 days, continuous, not 1 hour of it anywhere near Cutter Road. Nora Bell's hands stayed steady as she laid down each page, but her jaw was tight. She had worked in that building 20 years. She had told herself on the hard days that the stamps and the logs existed so that this exact thing could not happen to a person. Today she learned they only worked if someone opened them. A child had opened them. She would not forget that. Every single document told the same story, and it was the boy's story. The county had arrested Marcus Carter for a burglary it was, by its own record, holding him in a cell to prevent him from reaching. Nobody had to trust an 11-year-old. They only had to read the building's own memory, the thing Elijah had tabbed weeks before. No clean date, no probable cause. As the young public defender who had stood was at the rail now, unable to help herself. Your Honor, if the defendant needs counsel for what comes next, I will take it. No charge. She was looking at Elijah as she said it. Though I am not certain this young man needs much help. A few people in the gallery laughed, and this time the laugh was a clean one. Judge Hale set down the last page. She took off her glasses, which those who knew her court knew she did rarely, and only when she was about to say a thing she meant with all of herself. But she did not say it yet. She was a careful woman in a careful chair, and there was still a form to all of this. There was still a ruling to make, and she would make it correctly. Here is where a lesser story would hand you fireworks. The prosecutor undone, red-faced, dragged from the room, the gallery roaring. I have to tell you it didn't go that way, and that the way it went instead was better, and quieter, and more true. Justice, when it is real, rarely raises its voice. It signs a paper. It moves a decimal. It goes home to dinner. The people's case, Judge Hale said, rests on one charging document, and that document rests on a date. The county's own custody records, authenticated on this record, place the defendant in continuous custody across that date. There is no probable cause that survives its own paperwork. I will not pretend otherwise to spare anyone in this room an uncomfortable afternoon. The charge is dismissed. She said it the way you read a weather report. No flourish. The gavel never left its rest. She wrote it, she spoke it, and it was done. Case number, defendant name, disposition, dismissed for want of probable cause. One line in a docket that had swallowed 1,000 lines like it. A man's freedom, entered as a line. Now then, Judge Hale did the one thing the flat version of justice allows itself, a single human line inside the procedure. She looked at Marcus Carter directly. Mr. Carter, this court held you 3 weeks on a charge its own records could have cleared in an afternoon. I cannot give those weeks back to you. I can tell you on this record that the failure was ours and not yours. I am sorry. A judge does not say that word often. Marcus Carter did not know what to do with an apology from a judge. Men like him did not get those. He stood, and he said the only thing he had. Thank you, Your Honor, for listening to my boy. And Judge Hale, who had signed 1,000 fast orders on tired afternoons, wrote this one slowly and made certain the word dismissed was spelled all the way out. Andrew Pike did not argue. There was nothing left to argue with. He closed the red folder. That was the whole of it. He closed the red folder, and the small click of it shutting was the only sound he made. No speech, no apology, not yet. He gathered his papers, squared them once against the table, and sat with both hands flat on the folder he had been so certain of an hour before. Sit with how ordinary his defeat looked, because that is the part people get wrong about power. A statue topples. Power just stops being believed. 1 minute a room takes the man in the good suit at his word. The next minute, it does not. He is still standing there. Same suit, same watch. Only now, nobody in the room is listening to him. The gallery did not cheer. It is strange, but true. When a room watches a real wrong come undone, it does not whoop like a ball game. It exhales. A long, unsteady, shared breath, some of it wet, all of it quiet. The loudest thing in that courtroom, when the charge fell, was the sound of a great many people finally releasing a breath they had been holding for a boy. Or there would be consequences for Andrew Pike, and they would arrive the way real consequences arrive. Slowly. On paper. A review of the charging decision. A bar complaint filed by a public defender with good handwriting. a number in a newspaper, 60 and 40 and 11, that would trail his name in every search for the rest of his life. It would not be a lightning bolt, only a long, quiet erosion. And Officer Dwyer, who wrote a date at the end of a long shift and swore to it from memory, would answer for it too, in an internal file most of the public would never read. That is where these corrections live, not on a stage. In a manila folder in a cabinet, a slow tooth of the system turning to fix, over months, the careless line a child had fixed in 40 seconds. There were forms, of course. There are always forms. A dismissal has to be entered. A release has to be ordered. A property clerk has to bring a man back his belt and his shoelaces and the $11 in his pocket the night they took him in. Nora Bell handled most of it herself, and quickly, because she had watched this man's son earn every one of those forms in open court. Notice where the room was looking. It was not at the prosecutor closing his folder. Nobody in that courtroom had a second to spare for him. Every face had turned to the defense table, to a man in a jail shirt just told he could go home, and to the boy in the too large blazer who had made it happen with a library book and a stamp. The story was already leaving Andrew Pike behind. So will we. They let Marcus Carter change out of the county shirt before they let him through the doors. A small mercy. He came into the courthouse hallway in his own clothes, a mechanic's clothes, and he stopped short when he saw his son waiting on a bench, the backpack in the boy's lap, the old book zipped back inside it. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Marcus crossed the hall and went down on his knees in front of the bench, so that he was looking up at his boy, instead of down. Both oil-stained hands came up slow and settled on the sides of Elijah's face, gently, the way you hold a thing you were certain you had lost. "You read the whole thing," he said. His voice broke on the word whole. "You read the whole thing." And Elijah Carter, who had stood steady in a courtroom full of adults, who had not shaken, who had done the hard grown-up work of finding out what was true, before he let himself feel any of it, finally let himself feel it. He put his face in his father's neck and cried like the 11-year-old he still was. "I told them, Dad," he said into his collar. "I told them, and this time they listened. I have watched a great many reunions from the corners of rooms like that hallway. I will tell you what undid me about this one. It was not the crying. It was the book, because when Marcus finally stood and lifted his son up with him, Elijah reached into the backpack, drew out that $2 evidence book, and pressed it into his father's hands. "It is yours now," Elijah said. "You should learn it too, in case I am not in the room next time." Marcus laughed, a wet, broken, astonished laugh, and held the book to his chest with one arm and his son with the other. $2, 11 years on a shelf gathering dust, and now the most valuable object that family owned, because a boy had turned it into a key. Outside on the courthouse steps, some of the gallery had spilled out and waited. The old man who stood up first, the woman who had laughed and then stood. They did not make a fuss over it. They only wanted to watch the boy and his father walk out into the afternoon together, because they had watched the two of them come in apart, and a person likes to see a thing set right with their own eyes. Here is the twist the county never saw coming, and it is not the kind that ends a story. It is the kind that begins one. The review of Marcus Carter's case would not stay a single case. When they pulled his file and found the date nobody had checked, somebody had to ask how many other files had never been checked either. A boy's 40 seconds became a question the whole office had to answer. They opened a review of the charging unit, not because anyone there volunteered, because a public defender with good handwriting filed the paper, and a judge who had said, "I am sorry" on the record, made sure the paper had teeth. Every case that office had built on one uncorroborated date got a second set of eyes. Most of them held, a few of them did not. And those few were men who went home to their families. One of those men was named Deshaun Ellis. He had taken a plea on a date nobody checked because a plea came faster than a fight, and a fight cost money he did not have. When they cleared him, he asked to meet the boy who had started it all. Elijah shook his hand like a small, serious man and said only, "I hope you get to go home now." He did. They tried to work out what you give a child who just did their job better than a room full of professionals did theirs. They did not give him money. His father would not have taken it, and the boy would not have known what to do with it. They gave him the one thing he had actually been reaching for all those afternoons at the corner table. They gave him the shelves. Nora Bell took him on. A supervised place in the clerk's office, 2 afternoons a week. Allowed under the rules because it was mentorship and not labor. He would file and fetch and reach the high books down for other people now. And the woman who had spent 20 years believing the stamps kept people safe would teach a boy how to make them actually do it. That is the best kind of restitution. A door held open. On his first afternoon in the clerk's office, Elijah reached a heavy volume down for an old man who could not manage the top shelf, the same way Nora had once reached one down for him. The old man thanked him and asked if he worked there. Elijah thought about it a moment. "Not yet," he said, "but I am going to." So here is the part you say out loud. The most dangerous mistakes do not always wear the face of a villain. Sometimes they come from tired people who trusted a date because a confident man told them to, and from a system that reads the front of a page and files the rest unread. It takes someone small enough to be overlooked and stubborn enough to read the whole thing, to find the one line nobody checked. Never underestimate the quietest person in the room. Never underestimate a child who was taught to write down what is true and to trust it over every adult who calls it nothing. The smallest voice in that courtroom carried the largest truth inside it, and it needed only 40 seconds and the plain courage to stand up and spend them. If this story brought someone to mind, someone the world keeps overlooking, a quiet kid, a tired parent, the person who notices what everyone else is too rushed to check, send it to them today. Then ask yourself one honest question. If an 11-year-old in a borrowed blazer stood up in a room where everyone was laughing, would you have stood up with him? Or would you have looked down at your phone? Marcus Carter went home that night to a small apartment with a shelf that had one empty space on it, where a $2 book used to sit collecting dust. He did not put the book back on the shelf. He set it on the kitchen table, where the two of them do their reading now, most nights. A father learning the thing that saved him, from the son who had learned it first. Some nights Marcus falls asleep over that book now, the lamp still burning, the way his son used to. Elijah covers him with a blanket and marks the page for him. They are not rich. The apartment is still small, but there is a book on the kitchen table that a whole county could not argue with, and a father who is home every night to read it. I am the quiet witness. I sit in the backs of rooms where nobody expects the truth to come from the smallest chair in them. I watched a boy hand a judge 20 seconds back and hand a father his whole life forward, armed with a library book and a rule his own dad had never read. I am telling you it happened the way the boy showed it, because he read the whole thing. Watch the quiet ones. Teach them to write down what is true. And when one of them stands up in a room full of people who are laughing, be the one who stands up too. That is the whole job. It always was. Somebody has to read the back of the page. It may as well be a child who still believes the truth is worth 40 seconds of a grown-up's time. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, names, events, and places are entirely fictional, and any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events, is purely coincidental. If a story like this one moved something in you, it is because the smallest voice, telling the plainest truth, has always been the hardest thing in the world to silence.